Okay, my name's Steve Kraus. Going to talk to you about why I think farriers need to know a little something about saddle fitting. This lecture is not intended to make you become a master saddle fitter, but I think there are problems with saddles that relate to us. And as you can see by this title slide, if girth has to be tightened that much, the saddle very likely doesn't fit. So saddles and riders can cause shoeing-related problems. And so I like to pose questions here to you. Why do farriers need to know about saddle fit? What are the consequences of improper saddle fit to the horse and to us? How does rider position affect gaits? And can we do our job better understanding all of this? So we need to shoe the whole horse, not just the end of his leg. We need to understand what's going on with the whole horse. And when we do not look at the way horses are saddled and ridden, we are actually approaching certain problems blindfolded because we don't have all the information we need. Why assume responsibility for things that aren't your fault? I have to credit Bob Smith with that line because he uses it in some of his presentations, and this is true about saddle fit. Poor fitting shoes can cause lameness. That's our problem. Poor fitting saddles can cause lameness and movement problems. That's not us, but we need to know about it. Consequences of incorrect saddle fit: lack of forward impulsion, less extension of gaits, gait faults like foraging, overreaching, refusing to jump, bucking, and actual lameness, as well as poor turning ability and stiffness. A lot of people don't even know the parts of the saddle, and as we talk through this, we certainly need to review when we talk about different parts of the saddle, but the important parts that I'm going to talk about is pommel, cantle, seat, and panel. And then the forks, saddle forks, are right underneath here, and that's a very important part for us. So when a horse lacks forward impulsion, it's usually because these saddle forks are too tight and they're impinging on the scapula. See how this is superimposed? So here is the scapula. The saddle should not come on top of that scapula like this one does. And when a horse has his shoulders pinched, then the horse loses forward impulsion. This is pretty obvious right here. This is a long-term saddle sore on this horse. Saddle is chronically hitting the withers, and so a horse is not going to extend his stride when he has that happening. And it's amazing to me that a horse owner would not see that there's a definite problem here, but you're the ones that see it. You're the ones who should point it out when this happens, when you see stuff like this. Refusing to jump. Saddle is compressing into the horse's back. Usually the saddle forks are pinching. You have the weight of the rider and the momentum and the gravity coming down. And quite often when a horse refuses to jump, they say, well, he's sore-footed. He doesn't want to jump because his feet hurt. He doesn't want to land on sore feet. That may be the case, but you also need to understand what that saddle's doing to this horse when he's jumping. So if we start putting pads on and doing things for the horse that's unnecessary, we've assumed responsibility for the fact that this saddle is hurting this horse when he jumps or lands. So does this horse have sore feet or just a bad saddle? We should at least eliminate the things that are not in our control. I use the term all the time with my students, keep it simple. Look for the simple things first. If your refrigerator stops, the first thing you should do is check the circuit breaker. Because if you call the refrigerator repairman, that's the first thing he's going to do. You might want to figure out why the circuit breaker flipped, but check the easy things first. So if you have these types of problems, I want to see that horse with the saddle. I want to look at certain things on the back like I'm going to show you. And Certainly, I might even want to see the horse ridden. Bucking. Quite often the saddle is generally too long. You see how long this saddle is on this horse? It's right over his stifle area. It shouldn't be sitting back that far. This saddle is way too big for this horse. The rider is sitting way back too far, puts the rider out of balance. The horse doesn't like this weight on his back, and he's bucking because of that. Little cartoon I found. It says, the kid on the ground says, "Why did you buck me off, Fergus?" And he goes, "Sorry, kid, but something was irritating my back." Really, what was it? You. So when horses are lame because the saddle fit, again, we're impinging on the scapula. We can give horses over time a permanent back and sometimes rib injury. And with the saddle sitting in the right place, the horse should be pain-free if all the other parameters, like I'm going to show you, are correct. But we need to learn to recognize these things. Poor turning ability. So when a horse makes a circle, the whole spine has to turn within that circle. The tighter the circle, the more the spine has to bend to keep the head following the tail, or the tail following the head. And if a saddle is too long or pinching the horse, they cannot make a circle like that. If you have a crooked rider like this, the horse is going to be tilting to one side. If you watch a lot of riders, sometimes they are sitting crooked. They have problems with their back and spine. And again, without seeing the rider on the horse, you may be wondering why his shoes are wearing a certain way. Sometimes you see muscle atrophy on this uneven back conformation. This all can come from poor fitting saddles. So again, we need to see this stuff. And there's another telltale mark right there that this saddle was not fitting this horse chronically. Dry spots. So if you have the horse worked a little bit and then you take the saddle off and you see a dry spot, you have a pressure point right there that's stopping the sweat glands from going, and that is also pinching the horse and could contribute to lameness and lack of forward impulsion. Saddle marks here and here. You see this horse's spine is sticking up. I mean, very poor condition of this horse's back. And obviously this saddle has not fit this horse and has contributed to this muscle atrophy. And that, this is a very poor situation. And sometimes you just have to point this stuff out to owners. They're blind to these things. Here's a shot I took last week. A horse came into the hospital at Cornell with all these white hairs. Again, this is signs of a chronically, the pommel is way too low on this horse, hitting his withers. Because what happens is the hair follicles are compressed and they die. They don't produce pigment anymore. Here's another crooked and uneven saddle, and this saddle pitches the rider forward. This cantle here is way higher than the pommel, so the rider is putting a lot of weight on the horse's shoulders, again, creating lack of forward impulsion. The horse is on his forehand. This saddle here does not fit this horse. Here's one, the gullet's way too narrow, so it can't find a place to actually settle on the horse's back. So the saddle is going to be unstable. It's not going to move around, and you've got a pressure point right there because the saddle is moving around right there. The saddle should not be pushing on the horse's spine like that. So if we look at what we call rocking and bridging, so the panels of the saddle should create a situation not only with even pressure, but a very balanced seat. When a saddle is bridging like this, so you have a spot underneath here where there's no contact, and you have pressure points here and here. And if it's rocking, you have a pressure point right in the center, and you see there's no contact here and here, so the saddle is rocking back and forth. And all these things cause the horse to move differently, which may cause us to change our shoeing because the client is complaining. If we look at saddle stability and look at the bird's eye view, proper fit of the panels should produce this type of pressure. When a horse is bridging, there's the kind of pressure you get. When the saddle is rocking, there's the kind of pressure you get. And if the back is uneven, or the rider sits uneven, or the saddle has been broken in some cases, you get pressure similar to this. So there are lots of different things. And again, this horse may be standing different and moving different when he's saddled and ridden than he would be just standing there in the cross ties shoeing him. A lot of horses might stand underneath themselves more when the saddle doesn't fit right, because they're trying to rebalance the unbalanced rider. So again, to kind of sum up all the different signs of a bad saddle fit: white hairs, saddle sores, dry spots, muscle atrophy, or hard areas, so you can palpate across the horse's back and sometimes even see temporary swelling. When the saddle is going to, as the leg moves, as the horses are bearing weight and extending their leg, the scapula is going to move under those saddle forks. So you can see here, when the horse is standing, that's the gray right there, and as the horse lifts his foreleg right there, see, that's going to move back just a little bit, and then when he finally extends it, so if this is being impeded like it is right there, the horse is not willing to extend that leg and move forward the way we should. So if you're riding a horse that has to have extended gaits like a dressage horse, and that saddle doesn't fit right, the horse will not give you the extended gaits. The other thing a lot of people don't realize is a saddle should not fit behind the 18th thoracic vertebrae. So if a saddle is too long, or you have a short back in relation to the saddle, you're going to be putting pressure here like some of the ones you saw earlier, and this can cause actually damage and calcification and problems with the hind end on saddles that are too long for the horse's back. So this is like an unbreakable rule right here. You cannot fit past the 18th thoracic vertebrae. And being that all horses come in different lengths, so the problem you have is that if you have a saddle that you like and then you buy a new horse, that saddle may not fit that horse, unfortunately. So you want to try and think of these things, or you're into buying new saddles all the time if you have lots of different horses. I took this picture. This is at our home polo field. This bad saddle or bad rider? I say both because I know how this guy rides. But you can see how this saddle is too high in the cantle, and his rider position is poor compared to this guy whose back is straight, his weight is balanced in the stirrups. He's sitting way back, just impinging on those last thoracic vertebrae. So again, great shot to teach, but my friend probably will not like if he ever saw this. Certainly the horse's response to saddling. So if you have a horse that actually puts his ears back, wrings his tail, acts like this, which is extreme, as they approach with the saddle, and the horse normally is just fine, he's saying, that saddle hurts me. Rider too heavy, weight too far back. So this horse, look how this horse is bracing himself. Look how he's pitching his front feet out in front of this. This man is way too heavy for this horse. I don't know this guy, but way too heavy. And look, also, this saddle is way too far back. So we have a bunch of no-nos here. We have too much weight, saddle too far back, and this poor horse is just suffering in silence. So how much weight should a horse carry? So there's a couple of guidelines you could find, and I've looked at several of them. So the rider plus the saddle should be 15% of the horse's weight. That's optimal. Certainly an endurance racing horse or a horse that's got to jump should be following that optimal thing, because you're handicapping the horse. No different than they put lead in the saddle of racehorses to handicap them in a handicap race. 15 to 20% is acceptable, and that's not a problem. As you get into above 20%, now you're borderline of not being right for this horse, and certainly over 30% of the horse's weight is unacceptable. So years ago, I was at a horse expo where they were bringing in problem horses, and this woman shows up who is like 350 pounds with a 14-3 horse, and she wanted the clinician to figure out why her horse tries to run away from her when she tries to get on. And he was very good about dancing around the fact that she was half the weight of the horse. There's another method of figuring out what a horse should carry. The weight of the horse, rider, and tack, divided by the circumference of mid-cannon bone. Mid-cannon bone. Divide that by 2, and that gives you a weight value. Less than 75 is optimum. 75 to 80 is acceptable, and over 80% is questionable. This is another way to figure out if a rider is too heavy for the horse. And again, too much weight, you're going to hurt that horse over time. Proper saddle fit. We've talked about improper. Let's talk more about proper. So here's a tree from a saddle. It's just missing the scapula. Here's the way the saddle, so the flap can come over, but we want to make sure that the saddle forks do not impinge the scapula. Keeps the rider in a balanced position. Doesn't impede the horse's shoulders. Doesn't need a pad or a riser. A riser is something we put on to level the saddle. We either lift it up in front or lift it up in back. They have all these concoctions out there. A proper fitting saddle just needs a basic saddle pad. Doesn't need any extra special things. Again, sometimes you have to own more than one saddle, or you buy a new horse, you need a different saddle. Saddles should be level and balanced, so the rider centers his weight right squarely on the saddle, and we have proper wither clearance. That's about 3 to 4 inches on most horses. One way to check for rocking and bridging is very easy with your hand. Just slide your hand under, put some even pressure on the saddle, and you can slide your hands underneath every part of the saddle and feel what the saddle is doing very easily. So go from the back, go from the front. How saddles can be fitted properly? Well, there's a term called flocking, and that's like hiring somebody who's a saddle fitter. And we'll show you that in a second. They have saddles with adjustable trees, saddles with replaceable gullets, similar to adjustable trees. There's gel pads to make up the difference. Again, that's not the best way, but it's a way to get by sometimes. And then there's treeless saddles. So here's an example of flocking. This person opens up the panel of the saddle and takes this wool and trial and error, fits it on the horse and moves the wool around. I've actually made the tools for some of these saddle fitters. They're easy to make. It's like you put a rasp handle on the end of a 1/4 inch long rod, about that long, with a little curve and some stuff, and they reach in there and pull the stuff around and get it right. It takes a little learning to do this. You can't just do it easily. You have to take a course. One company makes a gullet measuring gauge because they sell the gullets, the replaceable gullets, and it's all color-coded, very easy, straightforward. And they sell you these gullets, and I actually own a saddle like this, and it takes about 5-6 minutes to replace the gullet if you have to change the gullet width, but it's a way you can get by with owning one saddle that'll fit a bunch of horses. And certainly you can look at the saddle pads and look at the dust pattern. Another way to think about this. And it looks pretty even here. So that tells you also that a saddle is fitting well just by looking at an even dust pattern. So when you have bridging and have these pressure points and have to do, the owner has to do something, this is unacceptable to keep going like this. So again, these different gel pads may be helpful to get by. So it's something, you can suggest to people who don't know this, understand this. Sometimes we deal with very highly professional people. They have good fitting saddles. Other times we have people who don't understand anything about their horses. So we have to help them. Treeless saddle. So you see this can open and close to the horse's back, and sometimes that's, depending upon the use of the horse, this may be a very good option for some horses. Elements of proper saddle fit, saddle position and seat length has to be, proper. The wither clearance has to be not impinging the withers, but you should be able to fit several fingers or a hand in there. Panel pressure is even contact. pommel and cantle relationship is balanced, not one higher than the other. You have a level seat. You have the proper channel and gullet width that's wide enough so you're not pressing on the spine and the panels sit properly on the horse. And the saddle is stable. And what I mean by stable is, yes, we can buy breast collars and extra cinches, but really a well-fit saddle, unless you're roping or in extreme conditions, doesn't need any of that stuff because it sits on the back properly. So the saddle should be stable. It shouldn't roll when the person gets on the horse. It should fit where it belongs and stay where it's supposed to be. Again, guidelines for proper saddle fit. We never want a saddle past any pressure past the 18th vertebrae. This is where it's got to bear all the weight. Seat length, again, here we have proper seat length. Here's the 18th thoracic vertebrae right about here, and we're missing that. We have nice level and balanced seat. Western saddle, same thing. Here we can fit a hand underneath there, no problem. And the other thing about gullet width, here's optimum gullet width here on this saddle, says 6.5 inches. Now we move over here to 6 1/4, just a 1/4 of an inch difference. And you can see we are not sitting this saddle properly. And here we go to 6 3/4 wider, and here we're putting pressure down here. So a 1/4 of an inch either way can make a big difference to a horse. Tree angle is also important. So you have tree angle too wide, and see how this saddle is hitting the withers right here, create those white hairs. Here's the correct tree angle on this type of saddle, jumping saddle. They do have transducers that some of the saddle fitters use, transducer pads, where they put it on the horse. They have the person ride the horse, and they do what they call a saddle scan. So this pretty much tells you right here, you got pressure points here. This would be incorrect, and this is actually much better. Again, level seat, wide gullet, forks not pinching, proper clearance, flap in the right place, good gullet width, proper wither clearance. Same thing here, just a different saddle, nice level seat. Another one, forward seat saddle. Again, everything is proper there. Here's correct gullet width. These panels, when the rider, they'll compress a little bit, will settle down a little bit more with the weight of the rider. These are pinching a horse, gullet's too narrow. This saddle maker says we can fit them all. So here on the bottom, you have a horse with a wide round back. Here's a horse has a little muscle atrophy, more padding in the panel for hollow withers. And here's a saddle with a higher clearance here for a horse with high withers. So saddle manufacturers are definitely in tune to what the needs are, but the horse owner sometimes doesn't realize it. And you as the farrier can at least look at the telltale signs that not only help this horse, but not change your shoeing because of what the saddle is doing to the horse. Here's a picture of me on one of my horses. You can see my shoulders through my knees to my stirrups. This horse is self-carrying. I don't have a lot of tension on the reins. We are balanced. Horse carries himself well. This horse is 28 years old when this picture was taken. And you can see this horse just carries himself right along. This saddle is not bothering this horse at all, and neither am I. So we need to look at the whole horse. If there are gait problems, interference, movement-associated lameness, check the saddle fit. Poor fitting saddles can put the rider out of balance, causing us problems. Learning to observe problems beyond the foot aids in professionalism. The end.